I can do things at WED without asking anybody, even my wife.
Coney Island, world's biggest barrel of
and
fun.
anywhere else your imagination takes you.
Okay, we've done that now, Mark.
To get the whole show now, you hurry, hurry, hurry.
Anything's possible at Disneyland.
Welcome aboard the Themed Attraction Podcast, where we take you for a ride through the magical world of theme park design, that is. You've just set sail with us on a voyage of storytelling and discussion with theme park industry masters of the craft. I'm your skipper, Freddie Martin, and rocking the boat with me, as always, is theme park designer, master planner, and chief creative officer of Storyland Studios, Mel McGowan. Where's the river taking us today, Mel?
Well, Freddie, it's a privilege today to dig into a great conversation we had with my good buddy, Mark Eades, one of Disney's second-generation Imagineers who helped bring Epcot to life back in the 80s. He cut his teeth in Disney animation and film and was called up to Imagineering by Marty Sklar to manage production of Epcot's film-based attractions, including CircleVision, American Journey, Star Tours, Muppet-Vision 3D. He really kind of started this entire theme park production studios for the parks. He later on went to become the theme park guy for the Orange County Register, covering stories from all of Southern California, as well as U.S. world-class attractions.
That's awesome. Yeah, this is really cool for me. I've enjoyed more than one of Mark's favorite drinks with him, the Disneyland Manhattan at Steakhouse 55. Listening to stories from the genesis of many of my favorites, and although this was a dry interview, Mark's stories reportedly, Mark's stories still fit the bill. All right, folks, keep your hands, arms, feet, and leg inside the boat, because this episode is about to leave the dock. Hit it, Sam. So, Mel, how did you meet Mark Eades first? Do you remember?
Well, while he was over at Orange County Register, he reached out to me and actually suggested that we probably should get together and have a drink or break bread at least. And I thought that was really gracious of him. I had been reading his stuff for years and following him, and it was great to finally get together and swap stories and, talk about shared friendships and relationships. And since then, he's just been almost like an extension of our team. I mean, we're really excited about some upcoming creative collaborations. We've signed some mutual NDAs of some projects that we've both got on the back burner. So we're excited at not just kind of the historical friendship here that has been built up over the last few years, but of kind of the next chapter and some stuff we're going to get to work on together.
Yeah, and because he's been around a while, he brings a lot of experience to what we do and what the projects you get to work on. So, a lot of what Mark had done was in film and creating films for theme parks. And most people don't really think of film as a major part of their theme park experience, but it's probably the single most flexible an important element for creating quality attractions. So many of what the attractions that we see today have some sort of film-based or projection-based element to it. Even the VR, that's all film. So wanted to think this through with you. What's so compelling about filmmaking, the kind that Mark was part of, that makes themed attractions so much fun? Creating film for theme parks. What's so important about that?
Yeah, well, as a film major, really we understand that whether you're talking about as film or really media, digital storytelling, it's on the one hand, it is this unique collective storytelling medium, like themed entertainment design and spatial storytelling. But again, specifically that aspect of not everything has to be built out with bricks and mortar, that you can augment that. It's kind of a bummer when you completely replace it with just a two-dimensional digital or filmic situation. But when you augment that in some of the very best examples, and from an environmental perspective, I think of rides like the Navi River journey that our friend Mike Schwalm worked on. That really just adds an extra layer of depth and immersion and flexibility and updatability. And again, so it's kind of a balancing act between kind of being overly reliant especially when you're translating movie-based IPs and film products.
It's really
it kind of is a knee-jerk thing that, hey, let's just throw some motion seats and kind of a sequel, on a two-dimensional screen. But when you go beyond that, there's some pretty unique hybrids and combinations that are just now, I think, kind of being explored to their potential.
And it's not just a magic bean or a magic pill that we'll just throw some film in here. It really has to be thought through and done in a great way. We've got a lot of river to cover today because with Mark, we can talk for a while. So let's shove off to the Blue Sky Loft at Storyland Studios with our guest for today, Mark Eades.
Well, we're here at Storyland with a good friend and another Imagineering alumni, my buddy Mark Eades. Welcome, Mark.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's really exciting to have you in here. We've kind of built a relationship over the last year, going around, hanging out at the parks and learning a little bit from you. I mean, it's really cool to have read a lot of what you've done, both on your website and in the Orange County Register and other things. I mean, you've really sort of followed a career with deep themed entertainment industry insight. Isn't that true?
Yeah, I would say so in that I've had two careers, both as an Imagineer and designing other theme park attractions for Universal and Warner Brothers. And then I went into journalism and eventually ended up covering Disney and theme parks for, 8+ years, and I'm still doing some freelance stuff. So it's kind of I get to see it from both sides that a lot of people don't really get to. Most people who cover theme parks, they're the outside looking in, so they have to deal with what they're fed to a certain extent, and it's hard to get away from that veneer. And being on the inside and actually having helped create some groundbreaking attractions at their time. So I think I have a unique perspective that most people don't. And it's been fun on the covering it side as a journalist, in that the parks have been a lot more open to me than they have to others, and allowed me to do. I haven't seen any really good behind-the-scenes stories like I was doing that were in depth. So it's been fun. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. I mean, you blazed the trail that we're trying to catch up on. The idea of applying that brain damage you incurred at Disney and the insider knowledge, like you said, leveraging some of those relationships and friendships, and really kind of having just a unique perspective on the industry. So I kind of almost see the conversation as kind of two parts, kind of your a little bit of your backstory and history and kind of in the game, if you will, in the creative sandbox of Imagineering and elsewhere. And then I really can't wait to pick your brain on kind of that unique, zoomed out, a higher level perspective that you've gleaned over the last decade plus of just the overall industry, where it's been and where it's going. So
so
about this.
I want to dig in first. Let's talk about the first themed attraction that you got to work on. Tell us how you got into that a little bit, and then we'll leap forward through the eons.
Well, oddly enough, I came to WED, which is now known as Walt Disney Imagineering, in the fall of '82 after Epcot opened. I had been working on Epcot and Tokyo Disneyland on all the films for the parks as a post-production supervisor for a couple of years of very long hours, which anybody in the business can recognize.
Which, for those folks that don't know, opening day Epcot, there were a lot of films, a lot of media.
There were 120, I don't remember the exact number anymore, film projectors that needed film on them. Now, some of them were like CircleVision, so there's 9, et cetera, but that included what we refer to as ride loops. They were all done with film back then. Right. Now they do them with digital projectors. And if you went through the World of Motion, there were, I think, about 18 film projectors in that ride, not counting the first floor. Spaceship Earth had 5, believe it or not, including the Roman chariot scene, which you didn't know was a film because it was a projected image of a Roman riding a chariot down a blacklight street. It was really kind of cool. To Magic Journeys, to the Land Pavilion. I mean, they all had, just about every pavilion had some kind of projected media in it. And if it was film-based, it came from the studios. That was my issue to deal with. And then I came to WED, and I had to deal with the production side. But the first attraction that I actually started, that had not started yet, was when we did American Journeys for Disneyland.
Yeah.
And that started in the fall of '83. And then we opened in the summer of '84. Actually, it started in the summer of '83, and we opened in the summer of '84. So that was the first attraction that I actually was the show producer from the beginning of, okay, we're going to redo a new CircleVision film for Disneyland to replace America the Beautiful, to the end.
Yeah, kind of a daunting challenge to replace, a classic. I mean, almost from park opening.
What was fortunate was we hired Rick Harper, who had directed the France film, which is still running.
Unbelievably.
Not a frame change.
Yeah. Still wonderful. Love those bell bottoms.
It's a wonderful film. And but he was hired to direct the film because we had to have 4 seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall. We had to have a second unit, so Jeff Blythe actually directed some of the second unit stuff. And we didn't really have a script, so it was just go out and here was a shot list and get shots the best you can, and then we'll sort of figure it out. And actually, when we got to the Christmas of '83, Randy and I sat down and looked at what we had and said, okay, we need to kind of stop for a week or so and let's figure out what this film's going to be. And so we brought Rick home and had big meetings and actually created huge storyboards by taking clips out of the scenes that had been shot, and they figured out the script. And out of that, Rick knew what he was going to have to shoot, and we had to bring Jeff Blythe back in to shoot 4 more shots, 3 of which ended up in the film.
Wow.
So it was nice to, let's figure things out before we start filming, guys. It's a concept. But, it was documentary style.
Yeah.
So,
well, you casually mentioned Randy. We probably should pause and talk about Randy Bright.
Randy Bright was, I first met him working on the Epcot project at the studio. He was the executive producer for all the films. And he, for some reason, noticed me and what I was doing and the chaos of getting all these films done. And eventually approached me to do more and asked, well, what would it take to get you to do more and to get, a raise. And
let's start there.
Yeah, and I got, at the time I got a decent raise. And then what was the next thing? And I said, well, when Epcot's done, I'm probably going to be out of a job here at the studio. Maybe I could come to WED. And he agreed. And shook hands on it outside the restrooms on the west end of what is the Mary Poppins stage now. And that was it. Nothing in writing.
Glad it wasn't inside the restroom.
Right. Well, we'd gone outside because he didn't want others to hear the conversation.
Yeah. And you clearly washed your hands and dried them.
Yeah,
and
yes.
Yeah, okay,
but,
good.
What was ironic was I ended up having to hand carry the only print we had of Magic Journeys, the 3D film, 5 days before opening. And I had to take the red eye. I had 2 first-class tickets, one for me and one for the 2 cans of 70-millimeter film. And it was not a direct flight. They didn't have them back then, so you had to go through Atlanta. You haven't lived till you've carried 2 very big cans of 70-millimeter film through the Atlanta airport. I'd like to have God carry that film next time. And then got it installed. And then the next day I had my wife fly down with our oldest kid, newborn. He'd been born in July, and they were there for the opening of Epcot. And I had to go around and take a look at how things were and weren't working and what fixes we need to do on all the different films and videos. And, of course, I was now going to inherit the Horizons Pavilion production. But on the day I was supposed to leave, I had a message from the WED field office that Marty and Randy wanted to meet with me at a certain time because they knew when I was going to leave. Remember, there's no cell phones back then.
Yeah, right.
So we met in the hallway of Communicore outside what was the show called a Studer Computer Review. And it was pretty much by October 4th known we were going to have to redo that show because it, sucked. And
don't hide your feelings, Mark.
Well, it wasn't just me. Everybody was saying it was not a good show about how computers worked. And so we met, in the hallway. Here's Marty and Randy right on time because they knew I had to take a plane home. We talked about some of the things that needed fixed around the place that were in my bailiwick. And after that conversation, I looked at them and I said, I guess I'm a WED employee now, right? And Randy said, yes, it's all set up. See so-and-so in professional staffing. They're setting it up as a transfer. Nothing in writing. I never said another thing about it from that moment almost a year and 3 months prior. And they remembered and honored the commitment and brought me to WED.
Wow.
And
Yeah, it's different world.
That's how things worked then. So, and gosh, we did a Studer computer review almost simultaneous to we redid that as called Backstage Magic, and Rick Rothschild headed that up with Scott Hennessy as the writer, and we shot it as video that we transferred to film, and then we did American Journeys, which was from scratch. So that included a pre-show film. PSA was the sponsor, so the pre-show film was all because man wanted to fly. You can look it up. It's out there on YouTube somewhere. And
I remember the summer that opened, and I remember, PSA Airlines.
Yeah.
They sponsored both Disney stuff and SeaWorld stuff. But
what was funny about PSA was they were really hot on the fact that they were the first airline to have stewardesses in miniskirts. So we had
I remember that too.
They had a photo display of all the different stewardess costumes over the years, and it was like,
That's right. That's right.
And people were like looking at that, and it was like, look, Randy said, if that's what they want, they're the sponsor. Let them have that wall. And that's what we did. It was just
Think
okay.
of that as the selling point. I mean, that's crazy.
Hey, they were giving us $12 million, so
and entirely different.
And remember, at that time, we were coming down slowly. Horizons, so the place was going through a lot of layoffs, and after Horizons, it was really going through layoffs. And American Journeys,
kind of post Epcot.
Yeah, and American Journeys was the only actual funded project after. So there were quite a few Imagineers wanting to be a part of a project that they didn't need to be on. We had no special effects.
Kind of right in that transition from kind of the Ron Miller kind of old regime to
so it was interesting.
Mike Leisner.
But, during that phase, Randy had me research simulators, which eventually led to Star Tours.
Yeah,
so,
A nice little attraction there.
Yeah, but it was fun. I just researched simulators just for the heck of it.
Yeah,
they told me to.
Were there simulators around to see? I mean, you didn't have Google. You had to go see these things firsthand.
You had to do a lot of research. I went and flew an F-16.
The real one, not a simulator?
No, a simulator
Okay.
one. We went down. It was arranged. Somebody knew someone at the Marine Corps Air Station in Tustin, and they had they're training simulators. They were used for training pilots and stuff. Yeah. And I ended up trying to fly a helicopter. I'm not good at it. It took me 5 times to get the thing to finally get in the air. And when I got it in the air, I took it to 10,000 feet, artificially. And said, well, now you need to land it. You need to start coming down. Here, let's help you. And zip, all of a sudden I'm 100 feet off the deck. I can't land a helicopter. Every time I would have killed people. And they kept
That's why they have simulators.
Yeah, and went to a facility General Electric had, which was in Daytona Beach at the time, where they were doing a tank training simulator.
Wow.
And but out of that wrote a memo. There were memos back then.
A memorandum of understanding.
Yeah, but it was a memo to and from. I wish I'd have kept copies of it. But I was really big on not sneaking stuff out, unlike a lot of Imagineers. And the memo basically said how we could use the simulator, and it really came down to there were 2 paths to follow. A, admit it's a simulator, put it in Tomorrowland, and it's a flight training simulator. Everybody's going to get to go on board, and there'll be a glitch in the system and things go wrong. Instead of just a normal training flight, you do all kinds of crazy things. Right. Or B, some kind of other adventure, and we were all hot on Star Wars, and said, wouldn't it be cool if we could take a ride on the Millennium Falcon, and then when we get off, we'd get disgorged into the Mos Eisley Cantina. And here it is, 2019, and what are they finally doing?
They're making that cantina for you.
Finally bringing that memo to life.
Yeah, but there's a memo to Randy and Marty about it.
That's great.
From way back in 1984, somewhere in their files.
Well, I've been wanting to do that at least since 1984. If not
flying that Millennium Falcon.
So then we did Star Tours after we went through the management upheaval, and they brought in George, and there was when I had written the memo, I had solicited ideas from Imagineering and had like 60 some odd one-liner things, many of which involved the Star Wars universe. So that became kind of a starting point.
So I'm learning as we're doing the podcast that we have kids listening that in some cases, maybe not to this podcast, don't even realize that Walt Disney was actually a dude. And that George Lucas, pre-Disney purchase, there was a guy that wrote and directed the original Star Wars named George Lucas.
He was very involved in the original Star Wars. We had a big meeting once Michael Eisner had gotten him on board in a contract. There was a big blue sky session, and we sculled out all kinds of ideas, but out of that came the basic storyline that the original Star Tours had. It was an 11-minute show, so we knew we had to make some judicious edits, but that's what it was, and that's what it became. And of course, since it was an 11-minute show, we thought, well, we'll do another film every year or every couple of years, and we'll go to some of the other planets. And we never did.
Yeah. It had all the potential, but
the thing had
it was working.
Well, that's the thing, is that when an attraction at Disney has a line, why touch it?
Right.
Is sort of the attitude from a financial standpoint. I understand it. And the technology at the time could not handle it very well. We were talking about American Journeys earlier, and Randy had the idea that we would show 2 different films during the day. And we did. We set it up. We would show Wonders of China in the morning at Disneyland, and in the afternoon and evening it would be American Journeys. But that involved about a 40-minute downtime while you changed the show out. So it was more challenging with real film versus now when it's all digital. You just push a button. There it is.
Well, I'll never forget my first experience going through. I actually had a family friend that was a recent Vietnamese refugee, and to just kind of have just landed in America, and to step into that story, and I'm sure it's the same level of excitement, or that people are going to be feeling in a few months when Star Wars Galaxy's Edge opens up. But again, to step into probably one of the first scene 1 pre-show immersive cues, really, where you're literally just stepping into that Star Wars world. That was a powerful thing in and of itself, and to walk right in and see C-3PO and R2-D2 live, and then playing bumper cars in the asteroids. I mean, it was really I again viscerally remember that first time.
It really was an immersive. Instead of just a pre-show, it was an immersive. We wanted you to suspend disbelief. I mean, yeah, and it really helps suspend it. I
don't know if it's credited with that, but I don't know if there was a pre-show as immersive as that.
I think you're right. I think if you really step back from it really kind of was the first immersive cue. There have been cues behind the turnstile, like the mine train and the log ride at Knott's Berry Farm, where they hid them, but there's not much show value.
You've got air conditioning, you got show set,
Yeah, but here, you had the fake commercials.
You as the guest were being set up as a character doing something. I am going to travel to the stars, and that was unusual.
And we had the same mentality, too, about, the simulator itself, which was the Star Speeder. Yeah. It was a Star Speeder 3000 then. Was a character, just like the Millennium Falcon is in the movies. It had to have some character. And the pilot we wanted to have the pilot be a real character. Finding the voice was a challenge because I was the casting director at the time. And eventually we got Paul Rubens, who was Pee Wee Herman, to be the voice. And
horrible
very
impersonation.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to Galaxy's Edge because I haven't had it confirmed yet, but I suspect they brought Paul in to do the DJ version, which I think would be cool. So
I want to bounce back to something.
Okay.
I was at Epcot's 35th anniversary that October 1st, just a couple years ago, and I remembered that when I worked at Disneyland long time ago, I worked there the summer that it was the 35th anniversary of Disneyland. So I was there for the 35th of Disneyland, now at the 35th of Epcot. But while I was standing there watching the show at Epcot, I remembered the 35th show that they were.
Not a long time ago.
Yeah, but here's who was there. It was Art Linkletter and Ronald Reagan were on the stage.
Yeah.
And so then I flashed forward and thought, so did these folks who built Epcot, these designers who were all part of that, they're now at that age where this thing has legs, it has age, and they're at a certain age. And so I know that you were part of sort of a collection of bringing all the band back together, bringing all the opening crew. And I just wanted to kind of hear from you on that, because those are the now the elder statesmen that we're losing bit by bit, and just some of that.
Yeah, a few of us started talking about it back in 2015. Debbie Delmar and I have been friends for a long time, and we started talking about, wouldn't it be neat if the idea came up that maybe we should have a little get-together of some kind. And Disney, in the modern age, really doesn't do anything for the people that worked on it. They don't. And it eventually grew to where, let's have a reunion for everybody. And we really wanted to do it at WED, and Bob Weiss gave us permission, but of course we had to pay for everything. So Disney contributed no money. It was not cheap, but everybody was allowed to bring a second person, a spouse or significant other or whatever. And it was really neat. We all got together and didn't necessarily recognize some people. I had left Disney in '93, so there were people I had not seen in quite a few years, and like, I know the voice.
I know the memo.
But it was really neat, and we had a wonderful time. And the other thing we did out of that is there's a very, very private book that we put together. Mm-hmm. There's only 360 copies. I have 3.
Oh.
We thought it would be neat to put together like a scrapbook, and it became essentially a professionally printed book. But we asked everybody for photos they might have taken. Now, remember, this is back in the film days, and you weren't allowed to have cameras necessarily. You didn't have cell phones or smartphones, so it was a little challenging to get some photos of some of the stuff. We did get some. Actually, on site, there were a few people that brought cameras and took some photos, and we used a lot of them for a lot of the site stuff. And then we had people, John Roberto Drury, he drew some stuff, and he art directed it. Jerry Schneider helped get photos and put some photos in, and Jim Mulder helped lay out the book. Terry Dyer did the proofreading of everything, and I functioned as sort of a writer-editor, and Debbie managed it.
Well, I've got to ask you, this is a little maybe off direct topic, but I remember around that Epcot 35, there was a lot of conversation about just thinking through the legacy of Epcot Center and what that park meant to the world, to the industry. I'd love to just get your take on that. Especially with this kind of band of brothers.
Well, what's interesting about Epcot, if you really look at it in terms of the theme park business, Disney really was the only game in town at the time. Universal was thinking about a Florida park, but obviously they had their park out here. But Disney was basically it. Well, after Epcot finished and there was nothing else to do, at its peak, there were 2,700 people employed at WED Enterprises, plus some people at the studio, et cetera. There's no work. Nobody's going to get paid. So all of a sudden you have a lot of people with a lot of different practical expertise looking to do. And I think Epcot was the foundation and birthplace of the business of themed entertainment, because all those people went out. There were some companies that were outside that provided things like scenics and helped provide some of the physical special effects stuff and things like that. But now all of a sudden, these people have expertise.
Now you have a themed entertainment industry.
You had an industry. There wasn't as a lot of work back then. It was very lean for a few years, but it provided the foundation. And a lot of the people who worked on Epcot became very well-known names. Mark Fuller with WED Enterprises. He left
Bellagio
Disney,
fountains.
the Bellagio fountains, et cetera, but that came out of stuff that he helped formulate for Epcot. And just go down the line, Technifex got things, just all these different
and people
companies.
have really found those niches of kind of taking Imagineering out to the real world, from museums.
Don Iwerks, who was at Studio Machine Shop, he left and formed a company, Iwerks Entertainment, that did, simulator type projects for Dave and Buster's and others. Yeah. And a lot of those companies still exist or have been folded into others, and that became the business. And as themed entertainment as a business beyond just creating these things has grown, like Bob Rogers, it's all of a sudden museums got more theming. And Bob Rogers, who had done work for Epcot, formed his own company, and BRC Imagination Arts. It's still around, and Bob's still there, and they do museum projects and things like that.
Corporate showcase stuff.
Corporate showcases. He basically went off, formed his own company because they wanted him to take care of the General Motors first floor, and that became his business. And that's what's happened since 1982. So
I don't know if anyone's
you guys
ever
wouldn't
actually,
be here.
That's right. Yeah, I don't know if anyone's ever actually counted the number of organizations and companies that are kind of Disney alumni spawned.
Sort of an explosion. I mean, that's
And as I think what Epcot showed others was that museums don't need to be boring. At times, I think the museums go a little too over the edge of making it more like a theme park.
They blurred the lines for sure.
It blurred the lines, which was fine, and some of the stuff was pretty hokey. I know I kept being asked when I left Disney to do more and more 3D and simulator shows, which would just make the chair move more, make it in your face all the time. And I would try to explain to them, well, the reason great 3D works is you don't always have great 3D 100% of the time. And the reason a good simulation show works is you're not just bouncing them around all the time. And I didn't do a lot of projects because I didn't want to cheapen myself. So,
Well, when I think of theatrical productions with WED and Imagineering, another mutual friend and collaborator has been Rick Rothschild, and he's kind of
he's gone out and done some great stuff.
I know he's in Iceland right now, filming his latest.
He just
kind of
finished
soaring over Iceland.
he posted 2 days ago. He wrapped.
Well, yeah, I can't wait to ride that one. And but yeah, I mean, tell us about the collaboration with Rick.
Rick was. Some people view Rick as a hard-nosed guy, but he's really passionate and he wants the best, and he'll push the envelope. American Adventure was an example of pushing the envelope, because here we have a 70 millimeter film that's being blown up an ungodly amount of times, and he used to bellyache about we'd get jiggle. Well, yeah, you're taking something that has a tolerance of 4/1000ths of an inch and you're blowing it up. So 4/1000ths of an inch blown up to something that's 70 feet wide, it's gonna show, you know. Yeah. So I mean, but at the same time, he pushed people to do their best. And anytime he was on a project, it really turned out great. And there were some that got killed because it's like, nope, can't do that. He wanted to do a Russia Pavilion idea, and it would have had a film screen almost twice the size of American Adventure with one film projector. And that's when I actually got out the data on film tolerance. And I said, Rick, this is not going to work. Here's why, you know. And it got modified. Of course, it didn't happen, so whatever. But Rick, when he left Disney, what's odd was he just left Disney, and then boom, Michael Jackson died, and he had to come back and help bring Captain EO back in.
Those, world events. World events changed
and it was really fun because I'd started covering Disney at the Register, and I'd been doing a little bit, and here they're going to bring Captain EO back, and they had the big media thing, and I've got to interview Rick Rothschild. Okay, this is going to be strange. And talked to the editors at the Register at the time, and they said, well, yeah, as long as we somehow admit you worked on it. I said, okay. So I did it as a video interview, and I went up, hey, Rick, hey, Mark. Well, you and I both worked on this attraction. And Rick goes, yeah, I've got some of your memos still.
That's really fun.
And so it was really kind of like a circular thing.
How do you tell a story when people listen with more than their ears? Stories change lives. They make us remember, but only when they're felt and not just heard. Storyland Studios builds the impossible. We turn big ideas into reality. We tell stories in 3 dimensions to stir the senses so you can walk into places you've only seen in your dreams, in real life and real time. Storyland's artists, architects, and artisans take stories out of the imagination and build tangible dreams that leave lasting impressions and memories that endure for years. What's your story? Storyland Studios is themed entertainment, destination design, production, and fabrication. Connect with the team at Storyland Studios to get started building your impossible dream today. Visit StorylandStudios.com or call now 800-218-1932. That's 800-218-1932. Storyland Studios, your big ideas' best ally.
So talk about that a little bit. So you went on to then become a journalist, writing about the very things that you'd been doing in the industry, and that gives you a unique perspective to share with the audience or the readers.
I went into journalism in '97 after the themed industry in '97 was not doing well. That's when the Asian financial bubble had popped, and there was no work. And I'd actually started
between Disney and that. You had a chance to
I
work with
worked
some
on
other companies.
Several projects. I worked on the T2 3D attraction for Universal.
Right.
I proved the concept would work. Built a mock-up with 6 70mm projectors.
Still going in Japan, I think.
It's still there. It's closed
like the
in the States now.
collections.
Right. I did some consulting on the EFX show for MGM Grand.
Yeah, that was
the
a big
first
deal
one.
when that opened.
They wanted to do some 3D and stuff. It didn't have the legs, but and then I went to Warner Brothers and did some stuff for there. And I wrote the story and co-wrote the script and produced Marvin the Martian in the Third Dimension.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, K9, disintegrate that Earth creature immediately. And
the P-94 space
Q-38 Imodium disintegrator. and I got to where I could kind of talk like the character. Every sentence he says, you have to almost run out of breath at the end. Disintegrator. I could never talk like Daffy, though.
Yeah.
Which of their parks did that make it into?
It was initially destined for Warner Brothers Movie World in Germany, and that's where it went. And it was also going into Australia. And then they decided to put it into their Warner Brothers store that they had on Fifth Avenue in New York. So we put it in there. That store's now gone. Wow. Big expansion, trying to turn a store into a mini theme park, I guess, but we put it in there. And then after I left, eventually it ended up being licensed to iWorks Entertainment, and they put it into the Adventure Dome up in Vegas at the Circus.
Yeah.
And then it's the only themed park attraction that I actually have gotten a few residual checks for. Not because you're allowed any, but because they took pieces of it and put it in videos that they sold in Europe. And in the European world, the writers get a part of that by law. And I didn't know this. All of a sudden, I get a letter from the Writers Guild of America West saying, "Are you so-and-so who did this and this?" And I called the number and said, "Yes, why?" "Well, we've got some money for you." "Really? Why?" "Well, since so and such time we've been collecting all this data, and you're entitled to some residuals based upon what they use." So they sent me this 18-page document that said, well, it had been used, 1.3 seconds had been used in this thing. It was really wild accounting. And my first check I got for them had been for a period of years. So it was like $200. And then since they knew where I was, they'd send me a check every year until the time runs out. You get it for so many years. Yeah. And the last check I got was 2 years ago, was for $24. So.
Oh, wow. Interesting choice.
I'm glad you didn't have to do the work to collect all that.
My goodness.
Yeah, that's right. Interesting choice that it's Marvin the Martian as a character choice. And I think that there's rich story within that, but you think it's going to be Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck.
I was brought in to consult, Ryan Harmon actually has suggested me to them, and I came in and they'd written like 12 scripts from their Warner Brother animation folks, which were all doing the TV animation. They had Pinky and the Brain and all those crazy things on air, which were great dialogue-heavy animated things. And I loved watching them, but none of the stuff seemed like it would work in a 3D environment. Yeah. They had pretty much decided they wanted to use Marvin the Martian, but they couldn't figure out what to do. And so I came in and we talked for a while, and then I was given a consultant contract initially, and I read all the scripts, and I'm like scratching my head trying to figure out, and I said, well, let me play with this a little bit. And then I asked the same question you are. Well, we need a foil for Marvin. And based upon the history, how about Bugs Bunny? They did not want to do Bugs Bunny in 3D at that time. So I did a little bit more thinking, and I said, well, how about Duck Dodgers? Yeah. And they said, okay, that's not a bad idea. Play with that. Okay. And I went off, and then I came back a week and a half later, and I had a story written, a treatment, that was sort of a spoof on the Edgar Rice Burroughs story, Princess of Mars.
Yeah.
And so there was going to be a princess on Mars, and she wanted to be in this great 4D Martian extravaganza, and she needed a star. So she charged Marvin with finding a star, and she thought Duck Dodgers would be perfect. As we went through the iterations, the princess character got expunged, and it became more like the classic Marvin searching the universe for signs of anti-Martian activity, and he happens upon Duck Dodgers saying he's going to blow up Mars. Of course, it turns out Duck Dodgers is Daffy making a really low-budget sci-fi flick in some shed.
Yeah.
And that's about all it took. And
Sounds like a Tim Allen movie.
It was fun to do. 12 minutes at $12 million. It was about $1 million a minute when all was said and done. But at the time, we were taking classic cartoon characters, turning them into 3D animation, but we didn't want them to look like plastic like others had. We wanted to have the edge, the black line, and all that around them. And it was tough, and we had several studios involved, but we got it done, and it turned out great. And it was really fun. The guy who was the big, Richard, the guy who was doing all the Carl Stalling sound-alike for all the cartoons at Warner Brother Animation, wanted him to do the music, and so he met with me as we were going through the budget and said, okay, I've really got this down to a lean budget. And I said, no, you don't understand. This isn't TV. You need more. And he goes, I've never had a producer tell me to add more people to the orchestra.
That's a rarity. They get if they're willing to pay for it.
Yeah, well, I know, just experience, that a 20-piece orchestra doesn't sound that great when you're in a big 400, 500-seat theater with, 7, 8 sound tracks around it. And so I said, no, you need more like a 70 to 80-piece orchestra because, hey, volume helps. So that's what he did. And then in 97, after I left Warner Brothers, I took 6 months off. I literally took a self-imposed, non-paid vacation, had another kid coming, my 5th, and when I started to go look into the work, during that time I actually started occasionally going down to the Orange County News Channel, and my sister was working there, and I thought that was fascinating, this 24-hour news cycle, and I was intrigued by it, so I started working there part-time, and then right after I came off my self-imposed 6-month time off, I'd been talking to Landmark, and they had me sign a deal memo. That's basically you agree to do something if the money comes through. Right. And I was going to do something for a theme park in Korea through Landmark that was going to be based on the Aliens franchise, and it was very similar to T2 3D. And 2 weeks after I signed the deal memo, of course, the Asian financial bubble popped, and there's just no work. I mean, guys were moving back into their parents' houses. Yeah. And but I stayed on at the Orange County News Channel, went full-time, and I decided, I like this. And
so 20 years, 2 decades later of covering the industry. You're, when you talk big picture, zoom out of the individual stories, how would you characterize those last 2 decades of what you've seen, good, bad, and ugly?
Oh, man.
In terms of the story arc
you're in news,
industry.
so you see a lot of ugly.
Yeah.
4 years at the Orange County News Channel, which was a 24-hour cable news service in Orange County. And I actually took a leave for a while to do one more themed entertainment project where I wrote the script for the Daytona Dreamlapse simulator film for the Daytona Racing Museum. But they ended up losing money and, oddly enough, shut down. The last broadcast was at 11:30 p.m. September 8th, 2001. So, out of work. 3 days later, we all know what happened. So it was a tough 2002 at the Eades house. But the Orange County News Channel was in the Register building, and I'd gotten to know a lot of people there, and I love news, so I started freelancing for them and eventually went on staff. My first beat was actually Coda de Casa in the canyons, and you live close to there, don't you?
By where I live,
Yeah,
we have the Housewives of Orange County.
They started
at our
while
local
I was
Starbucks.
They started while I was covering Kodo. I still have Gina Keogh's number on my cell.
Yeah, some unique wildlife down in those canyons.
The Coda de Casa I call the Disney World of HOAs. And people wonder about that. I said, well, it's kind of like a Disneyland in a larger sense. It's surrounded by a berm, mountains, right? It takes a ticket to get in. You can't just drive in there, right? It has themed lands because of the way it was developed. Different areas have different looks to it. It has castles. Big mansions. It has all
the glory and plasticity of Orange County.
We'll get to that because it has recreation, golf, tennis, swimming, hiking, all that fun stuff. And it definitely has characters, many of whom have more plastic in them than the Disney characters. And then in 2009, the management, they knew my background, and Disney was not being something that they wanted to cover Disney more, but there was just standard coverage. And so they thought, well, let's, and I was complaining because I lived in Buena Park, which is North Orange County, and I was having to drive out there every day, and gas prices were suddenly jumping in 2009 a lot. And I'm going, I'm not making enough money here, folks. We need to do something. And they didn't want to particularly give me a raise. I said, well, I got to cut my costs. So they decided, a guy by the name of Chris Meyer, let's move him to Anaheim and let him cover Disney once in a while. There were some that protested, and my attitude was as long as you're open about it. And so in the fall of 2009, I moved to the North Bureau and started covering Disney and theme parks. And originally they just said Disney, and I said, there's another theme park in Orange County. It's called Knott's Berry Farm. And then I convinced them, said we need to cover things that relate to Disney, the business and related things, and we should be covering Legoland and SeaWorld. And so slowly that started. I just started doing it, and their attitude was just go. But the first time I went to cover a Disney story was the big press conference when they were going to announce all the changes they were going to do to California Adventure.
DCA 2.0.
Yeah, and so I was also doing video news because we were trying to say, hey, it's the internet, we need to do all this. So there were 3 people sent, the writer, a photographer, who's now the chief photographer at Disneyland, Josh Sudak, and myself to shoot video of this. So we go over, and it was the first time with the Disneyland folks. Now, I didn't really know the PR people at Disneyland at the time. John McClintock had started about a year and a half before I left Disney, so I didn't know him. So they didn't know me, from whatever. And we go walking in. I'm carrying a tripod with a video camera and my equipment, and it was held around the swimming pool at the Grand Californian. And who do I see first but Bob Weiss? Bob and I go back, to 1982. He sees me, and we greet each other like old school chums. I sat down, I go, Bob, Mark, and go over and we hug. And then we did something that in the Disney universe is a sin. I'm a reporter, right? He puts his arm around me, I put my arm around him, and we walk to the far side of the swimming pool away from all the Disney PR folks. So here's Bob Weiss, the executive vice president of Walt Disney Imagineering, in charge of all this, having a conversation with a reporter from the Orange County Register, and there's nobody listening to it.
Nobody protecting the, oh boy.
And, we're just having old school chums getting together, conversation. And after about 10 minutes, we look over, and though there were other reporters there, you could see all the Disneyland people, there's like 20 of them, every pair of eyes is looking at us. They're kind of in a semicircle. And we see this, and we look at each other, and I go, what do you think? We ought to do something about that. So we walk back around the pool, arm in arm, and I swear to you, these 20 pairs of eyes were just tracking us the whole way. So we just got in the middle of this semicircle, and Bob goes, I want to introduce you to Mark Eades. He's a reporter at the Orange County Register, my friend, and a former Disney Imagineer. And it was like a scene from The Incredible Hulk. When the Hulk turns back to a human, you could just see all the water going off these people and just going back to normal. And they were like, instant sigh of relief. Here's a person who gets it. Yeah. And so what was ironic was a week later, Adam Townsend, who was the writer, got a call from John McClintock. And they'd been trying to convince Disney to let us go up inside the Matterhorn and take pictures and shoot video for the 50th anniversary of the Matterhorn. And they'd said no. But out of the blue, John calls Adam and says, well, Adam, we've decided to let your photographer and videographer and you all go inside the Matterhorn to do a story and all this. And Adam was, to be honest, a little dumbfounded. And so he asked him, well, why are you letting us do this now? And this is a quote from Adam. And John said, let's just say having Mark Eades on the payroll is a good thing. Oh. And that really broke the logjam. And what was nice was we worked out some relationships and who to call, because sometimes when you want some answers from Disney, you're not exactly sure who to talk to. And they have the media relations folks and they have the public relations folks. And it's like, I think after about 3 months, I finally talked to Susie Brown, who was the director of media relations. She's now vice president there, and said, okay, here's my problem, Susie. I don't know who to talk to. So how about if I call you when I need something or when I want to pitch a story idea, and then you can figure out who I should be talking to if you're going to let me do it. And it really worked out nicely. And I
cool.
did a lot of behind-the-scenes things that they'd never allowed anybody to do. I walked around the island of the Jungle Cruise doing a story about how the ecology of the Jungle Cruise had changed.
Yeah.
I went into
That's a great story.
I was shooting video in the Roundhouse. David Gill was my rep, and he just, Mark, go, have a good time. He just let me film.
There's an element of trust because you understand.
And my attitude was, I'm not going to do like a lot of the blog sites were doing, trying to sneak stuff. If that was my story, that's what I did. If I saw something, I would ask about it.
Yeah.
But my attitude was, my job is to show you some behind-the-scenes peeks. I would. There was stuff I wouldn't show because I knew they didn't want it. And at the same time, part of it is, there's a couple of there's one website in particular I used to write on once in a while because you're all negative all the time. Remember, going to the theme park is about having fun. And if you're not enjoying yourself there, okay, complain about it, don't go.
Yeah.
It's a business.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's a business, and the business is selling fun. If you're not having fun, don't go. If the business doesn't make money, it will change. But if it's doing well and it's fun, enjoy it.
Yeah. I've been, in the period of time that you were working for the Orange County Register, a lot has changed in the area, in the city, in the theme park industry here in Southern California altogether. It just continues to have a trajectory. It's been through economic doldrums, it goes through strikes, it goes through all those things. What's the overarching view of where the industry is today and where it's going in the future?
Well, I think it's going through some changes. The biggest thing, obviously, Disney's building Star Wars Land or Galaxy's Edge. Harry Potter at Universal really was the next big fundamental shift, because when they opened the magical world of Harry Potter in Florida, that got a lot of buzz going, because now you were going into a land specific to one intellectual property, not just an attraction anymore. So where Star Tours immersed you once you entered the building, now it's going into a land. Now, there's a lot of people, fans, hardcore fans, who hate that. Okay, they're entitled to that. But at the same time, we used to talk about that back in the 80s at Disney. Wouldn't it be cool if you were really just in a place that you could never go? And could we do it? We actually talked about having pirates invade New Orleans Square and take over New Orleans Square, literally have pirate bazaars everywhere. That was one of the ideas at the time. And the whole immersive thing has really come full-fledged now. When I went to Florida in 2017 and I went to see, I'd seen the Harry Potter world out here when it opened, but I went to see the original one down there. And then I went to Diagon Alley, and oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah, it changes your mind about what can be done. It really
said, okay, once you go inside the alley, you really feel like you're someplace. And the Hogwarts Express was, wow. And I think in some ways the competition between Universal and Disney has spurred a lot of this on.
Yeah.
Cars Land at California Adventure was incredible. I saw Bob Weiss and Kathy Mangum, the executive producer, and Kevin Rafferty. Again, I've known all these people forever during the whole media shindig when they opened it all up, right? And I was coming back at the end of the 3-day marathon media, whatever. They're doing all this stuff. And I come around the corner in front of the Ghirardelli ice cream place, and I see the three of them having some ice cream. It was a hot day. And they see me, and Bob goes, well, Mark, what do you think? And I'm known for not hiding my opinion. And I set my stuff down, and I go, you really want to know what I think? Bob looks at the other two, and he says, hang on. And they both take a serious look at their ice cream cones, right? Okay, we're ready. And I said, Bob, Kathy, Kevin, I think Cars Land and Radiator Springs Racers will do for California Adventure what New Orleans Square and Pirates of the Caribbean really did for Disneyland, really put it on the map.
Yeah.
And
You almost transformed the experience of the park into a
Yeah,
kind of
it's-
another level.
yeah, instead of just being here's an area with a bunch of attraction, here is a land with characters and
by association, it's
immersive.
It's another level of theme park now.
yeah, it's the immersive experience that had been talked about, and I think that's where themed entertainment is headed. I think if you have attractions, et cetera, you probably, I mean, in some ways, Walt Disney did that when he had attractions in a Frontierland and an Adventureland and a Fantasyland and a Tomorrowland. And the area had a theme, sort of a broad theme, and then you had attractions within it.
genre-based, yeah.
But the lands were not based on an intellectual property. They were intellectual properties contained within the land. As a sidebar, I'll say I get tired of people saying, well, they didn't use intellectual property. And they go, well, you know, just about, other than the merry-go-round and the vehicles on Main Street, all of the other attractions were based on a Disney movie or associated with one somehow. So I don't buy that argument. But yeah, I think that's where it's headed. It's expanded out into family fun centers, et cetera, on a lesser scale, some of them not so good. You're seeing a lot of people trying these virtual reality things, so I think it's tough to make that pay because the throughput's not very good yet. I mean, when you can only do 4 people for a 15-minute thing, that's, you know, if you do the math, that's 16 people an hour, and if that thing costs you $250,000, it's going to take a long time to make your money back. So I think it's transitioning into something like that, but I think it still needs to find its way, kind of like the news business is trying to figure out how to stay in business and in this social media era.
Well, I'd be curious your thoughts. I mean, there's the Disney Universal, and then, of course, from a visitor fan, everyone's loving that competitive rivalry and that capital outspending. But in terms of the other regional parks, you know, in a way, it's almost, to me, it almost feels like a different industry at some level. That kind of that regional theme park industry. You know, I know Matt. We met, who was former president of Disneyland, and
He went to
I'm
the
not sure,
Cedar
chairman
Fair.
at Cedar Fair. You know, he had almost a differentiation between the theme park business versus amusement parks. And
Yeah, I think-
what's your take on?
Well, I think there's always going to be a place to go where you can just ride the rides because that fits a certain niche market. And when you have a limited attendance windows at some of these places of, you know, 4 or 5 months, it's harder to spend a lot of money. That said, I think economies of scale can come in to provide a themed immersive experience that doesn't cost as much. It's going to take the right kind of ideas from people within the business like yourself and myself saying, hey, why don't we do this, and we could build 10 of them for the cost of one of them and put them into the different places. And I think some of that's going to come in at some point.
Well, we're seeing that with, you know, like the Justice League attraction with the multiple rollouts at Six Flags parks.
So you don't have to spend so darn much money because you're going to build 10 of the ride vehicles versus one. So if you build one, it's enormously expensive. Now all you got to do is make a mold and you make 10 of them. It brings the amortized cost down. I also think
still letting people step into those IPs and those stories beyond just a themed facade or a name or a color scheme for a iron ride.
And I thought what Knott's Berry Farm did with Ghost Town Alive the last few years was incredible. Just people playing roles in an area that's the Old West. And they're actually taking it to Cedar Fair this summer. A version of, yeah, they've got an area they've kind Cedar Point is taking it to there.
Yeah, it's almost like low tech, high touch, but
it's very low tech, and
environment,
it's low tech on purpose.
Well, you know, it's funny because it goes back to the roots of that regional park model. I mean, back to the Six Flags Over Texas days where they would have simulated lynchings of Union soldiers, you know, by the Confederates. So, you know, it was living history parks.
The Western shootout. If you go to Old Tucson, I think they still do a lot of things like that.
OK Corrals and
so they have a shootout.
We're taking the family to Tombstone for spring break.
Go to Old Tucson. Yeah. We went there several years ago on a vacation. And I said, we got to go here. And the kids were like, hey, it's a Western town. Yeah, but it'll be fun. And they'd had a dark ride at one time, and now it was a walkthrough. But what was interesting to the kids was just walking these Western streets, and they had a few people playing kind of roles, and they had stuntmen and one of the shows, I got my daughter to be the volunteer, and of course all the men are purposely trying to leer at her and getting her to kiss them and all this stuff.
Oh,
and
my.
it was all done as a joke, though. I mean, it was
Yeah.
all very tongue-in-cheek. And there was something about that low-tech immersion. But I think immersiveness is going to move forward. I think virtual reality is going to move forward. I think as these rectangular devices we all carry around start getting better and better, and as the technology, the Wi-Fi networks get into the parks in a better way, whether they have to retrofit or as they build new, I think you're going to see either this or some, I would venture to say, I think you're going to see themed devices that are essentially these that they're going to maybe hand out eventually at some place, because that's the only way you can get through.
There's elements of that.
That's part of what they're trying to do with Galaxy's Edge, but I don't know that the technology's there yet or if they want to have the hardware with it. But I think you're going to see that coming at some point. But the flip side of that is at what cost? It is getting expensive to go to Disneyland. I know it's cheaper to go to the parks overseas, but it's getting expensive. And at a certain point in any household budget, that takes a toll. I'm not saying people are entitled to go, but that, to me, is a business opportunity for the other places. If you can offer almost Disney or Universal-like experience, and it doesn't cost $100 and some odd per person to go, it costs more like $40. Okay, you can.
But it almost seems like that's the niche that both Six Flags Cedar Fair has found, that you don't just have to focus on the adrenaline junkie teenage crowd.
And I'll give you another prediction. What do you think shopping malls are going to become?
Yeah.
I think at some point they're struggling, but there's a lot of land with a lot of buildings, and at some point, there's been attempts at it in the past. It was kind of the schlocky simulator 3D things that they did in Dave and Buster's and things like that. And people are trying to do it with the virtual reality little thing.
We literally just presented a master plan for a mall redevelopment last week that basically gave up the ghost of retail and transformed it into a food and beverage and entertainment.
And you're going to have some retail, but it's got to relate to what it is you're doing there, because otherwise, I mean, I'm buying deodorant for my wife and daughter online. I mean, what do I want to go to a store for? If I need more jeans,
you're
I can
going there
order.
for what you can't experience and what you can't get at Walmart or Amazon.
The only things we go out to buy anymore, frankly, are groceries that are perishable. So, your milk, bread, and veggies and things like that.
And there's something about speaking of going grocery shopping, like going to Trader Joe's, you actually feel like a human going to Trader Joe's because there's this interactivity that's unusual to grocery stores. So, I mean, they even
it's getting that way at a lot of fast food places. I went to the McDonald's down the street here, and I went up to the counter to order and said, no, you have to do it over here. And they showed me how they want you to do it with their big screen. It's like, really?
You're kicking me out. You're kicking the human out.
So,
Well, Mark,
lost.
I hope not. I hope not. Well, Mark, it's been a pleasure having you on the Themed Attraction podcast. I just enjoyed the friendship that we've built and hanging out and doing stuff together. You've been a great mentor even to me, pushing me into.
I'm still waiting for that invite for the world famous Eades porch.
You're welcome. The world famous Eades front porch. I never know when I'm going to open it. Of course, we've had a lot of rain lately, but if we get into some nice weather, it'll probably be open. And the nice thing is when it gets warm, it's easier to stay out there in the evenings.
That's good. Well, I'm saving up for my annual pass.
Well, there's no admission. Parking is free. Good luck. We're on a cul-de-sac.
If you can find it.
I will give you a bag of peanuts.
Well, you can't beat that. Thanks, Mark. Any last words?
Again, just thanks for the friendship and the journey together, Mark. And we're also excited at some of the future creative endeavors that we're looking to locate.
Maybe I can be involved.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Are we going to have the interview right here on the podcast? Or I suppose we should save that for another time.
Well, the NDA is already signed.
We've already had a bit of an interview.
Okay, excellent. I'm just not privy. Well, guys, thank you so much for today. Back to you in the studio, Fred. Well, that's it. I get a total kick out of Mark. Mark is hilarious guy, and he has a whole lot of stories to tell, a whole lot to share, a lot of experience and history with both parks here in Southern California and all around the world. It just bubbles up out of him.
Well, he's got such just a unique perspective, coming out of that era of Imagineering, and then being able to step back and looking at the industry kind of from a holistic perspective.
Yeah.
So much different than a typical travel writer,
Yeah.
ever would, at a local journalism output.
And I know that he's just still invited back regularly because of that unique experience. Hey, I've built rides, now I write about rides. He's always invited back to help to share that story. So really great to be with Mark today. Well, it looks like the compass is pointing back to the dock. Should we go? What do you say?
Let's roll.
All right. Until next time, thanks a lot, Mel.
The Themed Attraction Podcast is hosted by Freddie Martin and Mel McGowan. We can't thank you enough for listening to our show. It means so much to us. Will you leave us a review on iTunes Podcasts and share the show with your friends? We'd really appreciate it. We want to thank our guest, Mark Eades. Follow Mark on his blog, markeades.com. Get access to more stories and interviews at themedattraction.com, an insider's look at theme park design by theme park designers. Follow the action on Instagram and Twitter at Themed Attraction. Connect with Mel by email via mel@storylandstudios.com or follow him on Twitter at Mel McGowan and Instagram at Visioneer. You can find me at freddymartin.net and follow my adventures at Skipper Freddy on Instagram and Twitter. Our theme music was composed by Rob Watson, other music provided by The Lost Dogs. This episode was designed and produced by the one and only Dr. Barry Hill. Find him at barryrhill.com. Mel, Barry has a knack for knowing the right thing to wear for the right occasion. One thing he knows for sure is to never wear yellow at a gorilla party. They find it very appealing. Thanks for listening, folks.